Alrighty, so as I said again, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. So to kick us off, welcome to How to Stop Worrying and Love Making Presentations. I'm Dr. Dina Kurzweil, and along with me today is Mr. Brandon Henry and Mr. Douglas Onufru, who are all from the Education and Technology Innovation Support Office. So our objectives for today are outlined here for you. And what we're really hoping for is that you really get a sense of what it takes to develop good PowerPoint slide presentations, whether you're using Google Slides or PowerPoint. You can take a minute here and read the objectives for today. We're not expecting you to know everything about making good PowerPoints. And please also know that this recording will, in about a week to 10 days, be posted up on the USU YouTube channel under the ETI playlist for you to review afterwards or share with your friends. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Henry to get us kicked off.
All right, so I think everyone here has been in a situation where about halfway through someone viewing someone else's presentation, you end up looking at your phone, or you just want to check your email or complete that last level of Candy Crush. Why do you think that is? It's because the speaker was not communicating properly with their audience, and somewhere along the way they lost you. Presentations are a way to share your expertise with the audience. Imagine being at a dinner party or an event, and someone came up to you and started relaying facts and information with very little context or engaging story behind it. You'd probably find a way to excuse yourself from the conversation. This is how a lot of us create our PowerPoints. Not sure what the story should be, so we start doing the logical thing and just adding information that we do know, but we never really go back to massage that information to put it into an engaging story. So think about doing presentations before we had PowerPoint and we had to use note cards. Try to think of your slides as like a note card to keep you on track, but it's not every bit of information that you want to relay to the audience. It's just things to kind of remind you of what you're doing. So the main thing is not to confuse your audience. The presentations should complement what you're saying. It's not a place to put all of your findings. If you want to share everything, perhaps maybe a separate, more detailed document of your content would be more appropriate. A presentation is not a place to house comics and memes or pictures. Just like the presentation as a whole should complement your message, images should complement the content and not detract from it. And we'll talk more about graphics later on in the presentation. So now, when we're talking about content on a slide, how much is too much? Someone should not be able to stumble across your presentation and understand everything there is to know just by looking at your slides. Consider this as you're building a presentation, that there's something called dual channel theory that says we have an auditory and a visual channel to intake information. Each channel is limited in its capacity, so only a limited amount of cognitive processing can take place in the verbal channel at any one time, and only a limited amount of cognitive processing can take place in the visual channel at any one time. Your audience has to choose to listen to you and then organize mentally what you're saying, and then they integrate that information into their own personal context and how it relates to them. So think about your slides. If you have multiple lines of text as well as images that may or may not relate to your topic, and on top of that you're talking through it, you're going to overload your audience. And if you start overloading any of those channels, you're going to lose the viewer. So a good presentation is not something that you can really slap together the night before, and really should have several phases to it. Don't underestimate the time and effort that it takes to make a good presentation. Some of these can take weeks to create, and if you're not really good at presenting information, it may take even longer for you to practice that information and present it the right way. So sometimes it helps to create a project schedule. This will help you make sure that you meet your milestones and deadlines to get your presentation put together. And this is super important, is make sure to include time to make revisions, because as you build your presentation, Internally in your mind, it might sound right, but when you actually go through and practice it, you'll find parts that don't quite flow as well, or that you may want to rearrange things. And so you want to leave time in your presentation to revise. So how do we get started? Your message will be quite different depending on who you're presenting to. So is this a group of students who may be unfamiliar with the content, or is it a room full of professionals like yourself with a variety of professional and life experiences? And how you deliver that information will vary greatly depending on who you're talking to. So say in a professional setting, you might relay a story that happened to you related to the topic. With students, you may have to present a problem that they may run into in their professional careers. In this last one, unless your technical terms are a necessary element to what you're presenting, think about how you would talk to people at a social gathering and adjust accordingly. So we know our audience and we're ready to map this out. Simple but crucial, before you open and begin creating your presentation, know exactly what you want to say. And then break that story up into parts, and those stories could be, each slide. And then, you've got the big story, the whole overall picture. And then as you break down those slides, that's where you would start getting into a little bit more detail. Each slide should be about a minute or two of a talking point. And if you create your presentation and your narratives first, and then the slides, and then move to the bullets to support each of those goals, you'll be in a better spot. So don't start with the bullets and then figure out where to cram them all in to make it fit. And also, fresh insights can help prevent your presentation from being formulaic. Try not to regurgitate things that can be commonly found elsewhere. They came here to hear your expertise, and so don't offer them a textbook. Put your particular personality and flair into it. So as you develop and practice your slides, ask yourself, are there things that you find that you need to come back to? Maybe it's not the right order then in your presentation. If you're talking about some things and then you say, well, back on slide 3, we talked about this. You might think about reorganizing your slide presentation. And then you want to create like a nice flow that takes the audience through the beginning all the way to the end. Now, unless you're Quentin Tarantino, of course, then you can start wherever you want, but there's always a narrative to keep in mind. And you want to treat your titles as landmarks to help guide your viewer through the presentation. We've probably come up with catchy puns and quirky sayings and things like that that we can use for titles, but this increases the cognitive load on your audience, who then has to interpret what the title is and then decide how that pun kind of relates to what you're saying. So unless it's like really obvious, try to avoid things like that. And then, as mentioned before, only include the content that helps you tell your story. So this wraps up the planning phase, and now we'll talk a little bit about development considerations.
Hi, everybody, and thanks again for joining us today. So starting off with text and fonts. A lot of people tend to take their fonts and use the same size font that they would use in a word processing system like Microsoft Word or Google Docs. And you really want to only use smaller size font for citations. In doing your PowerPoints, 24-point size type is usually the smallest you want to go. You also want to ensure that you have a consistent treatment among all the slides. So after you've built everything, double check things for like, have you spelled out an acronym? Are you using capitals in the same manner? It's amazing how quickly we can forget about doing those in the actual moment. And then we need to kind of go back and take a look. So give yourself time in that schedule to review your formatting and what you're actually doing. And when we're viewing slides, be sure to reduce the overall zoom of your total slide presentation by 50% so that you have a sense of how the audience will see your slides in the room. This is really important because if the slides are too small, if the text is too small, if the imagery is too small and something can't be read, you're going to be able to see that in advance and fix it. So let's take a look at some slides here, at a slide here for some examples. So these are some obviously bad uses of slide font. And the big piece here that I want to be sure everybody sees is that there are lots of different fonts out there. And although using a nice cursive, as you see here, could be fun to have, it makes it harder for the learner to read what you're saying. So stay away from those types of things. You don't want clashing colors. Again, first of all, it makes it harder to read. But secondly, you don't know if somebody in your audience could be colorblind. Simple is always the best when you're doing your PowerPoint slides or your slide presentations. Trying to add too much bling to it is actually going to most likely backfire on you with your audience. So please try and keep things as simple as possible. So some basics about your actual presentation. If your audience can both read and hear what you're saying, it's a waste of time for you to read your slides out loud. And it's frustrating to the audience who could have just read your PowerPoint presentation faster than you could have actually presented it. The audience is going to zone out. They're going to stop listening to what you're saying. And this means they won't hear any extra information you include. Once they start seeing you're reading from it, they're going to start tuning out and going to that Candy Crush game. Remember to focus on one idea. And this is important because the goal is to prevent your slides from becoming so dense and text heavy that people don't want to look at it. Synthesize and be efficient in your word use. You know, if you can put it up there in 3 words and then have a nice sentence to go along with it to make sure people understand what you're talking about and the extra information, do that. Remember, you have unlimited slides. I could have taken this one slide and broken it up into 4 different slides to keep you focused on each point. So use the slides. Even if you only spend 10 seconds on one slide, that's fine. It's a focused piece. And if you have a lot to say, put it in your notes and let your audience know that everything you're saying will be in your notes section. A lot of people like using their PowerPoint so that they can give out these to the students so that they have everything they're talking about in all the words. And that's great if that's your own personal teaching style, but don't put it in the PowerPoints because then the students aren't going to be listening to you. Put it in the notes if you want them to have that information. Think about the actual example that we have up here and about how you can simplify the slides to the important message parts. So the one on the left versus the one on the right. You don't want to overload with a lot of information. A lot of times we have graphs, we have charts, we have tons of information in something. And it's, again, going back to cognitive overload. You need to consider this when you're developing your slide deck. You may have a great graphic from some piece of information that you've created, but boiling it down to those key important facts is going to allow you to keep your learners and your audience focused. And remember, again, you have an unlimited amount of slides to spread it out. So use that. If you wanted model 1, model 2, and then some of the graphics, break it up into 3, 4, 5 sections. Use your slides, enjoy them, spread them out. One of the next principles, and this is a guideline, let me say it again, it's a guideline. It can be efficient, but it's worth keeping in mind when you design your slides, which is the 6x6 guideline. It's a maximum of 6 words per line. Why is that? Well, because that's easier for somebody to look at and read quickly, but then come back to listening to you. If you just go over, it's not the end of the world. Maybe you have 7 words, maybe you have 7 points per slide, but be thoughtful as to why you're going over. This is key. Just the effort you put into actually using this guideline and putting it into practice is going to help you focus on exactly what you're trying to say. Remember to focus the content in a way that communicates your story clearly and completely in the least amount of space as possible. White space is your friend when you're doing a presentation. The elegance of expression, flow, and relationship to the actual words on the slide is the most important. And one tip I always tell people, that ampersand sign is a great space saver. You don't have to put in the word "and" fully in every piece that you're doing. So try and keep that in mind as you're doing things. So what not to do? I've seen a lot of different types of PowerPoint slides from a lot of different people and a lot of different organizations. And one of the really big things I see people doing that becomes problematic is cutting and pasting large portions of an article or a quote into a PowerPoint. You want to avoid full paragraphs and try to rephrase, But remember to give your audience time to read and digest. So if I have a short quote that I want people to read, I'm not going to read it to them. I'm going to say, hey, here's a quote from Einstein. Go ahead and take a second to read it. Pause. Give them the second to read it. You may be uncomfortable having silence, but you need to tell your audience what you are doing. Normally, I say something like that. Take a look at this quote. I pause, and then I move on to why that quote was important. I don't read the quote for them, just like I didn't read the objectives for you. I gave you a second to review them, see them, and then I moved on. I'm now going to turn it over to Doug to talk a little bit more about media.
So media plays a very important role, but it should be used carefully. You should be able to articulate the purpose of it. Why is it there? Why does it have to be there? Or does it? Your media should enhance and emphasize the narrative or focus of the slides. You want to limit so-called eye candy, that is irrelevant images in there just for the sake of filling the space. Now, that said, there may be a benefit in breaking the monotony with a nice image or a transition sometime, but the imagery should meet at least one of the 3 points listed on this slide and should still be used sparingly. Media is the most effective when it's high impact. It should be readable and well labeled, because it really serves no purpose if you can't read it or understand it. So like your text, strive to keep your media as concise as possible. A busy image with everything all over it has much less impact than a more focused image. And with all imagery, don't forget to add a reference for any media that you didn't make yourself. This slide shows an example of a high impact image. As you can see, the illustration is crisp. It has a title. The labels are well readable and appear near the associated anatomy. So there's no confusion as to what's what. There are also no unnecessary labels or visuals that distract from the graphic. So with media, knowing what not to do is just as important as knowing what to do. One of the most common sins is enlarging small images. This usually happens when people find things online and then blow them up to fill the whole slide. Unfortunately, this just reduces the image quality and makes it blurry and pixelated and hard to read. So you don't want to do that. You also want to avoid things like animated GIFs or unnecessary text animations. Now, that said, animation can be a useful thing as long as it enhances learning by showing, say, a sequence or a process in motion, but you still want to try to keep your animations as basic as you can. Here we have two very unfortunate uses of media. You see the first image is enlarged so much it's become hard to read. It's also artificially stretched to fill the space, which kind of distorts it and makes it look all strange. So what might have once been a nice image is now a problem. And you see this second image is an animated GIF, which it shows a heart like the other graphic, but it really doesn't offer much worthwhile. And in that case, it can go. And I'm going to turn it over again to Dr. Kurzweil. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. So a lot of times we're using tables and figures that are wonderful at conveying a lot of information, but we may need to break them down and separate them into individual slides, because busy slides are going to distract the viewer into what they're seeing. They're going to become overwhelmed and they're going to stop paying attention. So you want to really look at tables, figures, when exactly for what you're trying to get at, the point. You want to be sure that the data is clear and helps your audience make decisions. You want to strive to make data representationally proportional. So if something is 5 times bigger, Maybe in the actual graph or the redo of the table or figure that you're doing is 5 times larger. But you want to try and make sure that the information you're providing is relatable to the audience. You also want to consider things like infographics, and you can always come to the ETI with help with that type of design. It takes a fair amount of time to do. They're not as easy as most people think they are. So remember, you have a lot of options here, but in terms of tables and figures, try and focus in on exactly what you're trying to show. So let's take a look at an example here. So most people would see this table or this list here and only talk about 1 or 2 things on the table or graph. If the audience can't see what you're talking about, it's frustrating. So how do we fix something like this? Well, our next slide, you can see we actually took the information and kept it in the background as kind of a place so that you could see the overall scope. But we pulled out the relevant information so that you can actually see the important points that we're going to be talking about. And you can fade that background so it's not as distracting, or move the original background entirely and just focus on the points that you're trying to say. The next slide actually is informative, but it's not very impactful. You know, it has numbers here, and yeah, we can see that 17.65 million is more than 8.93 million, but what can we do to make this a little bit more visually impactful? Well, let's see on the next slide. Well, now we have a much more visually impactful piece, providing the viewer with focus on the specific areas of the data and reducing the cognitive load. Do you really need to know 17.65 is actually the number? No, but you can see that it is, the cardiovascular area is much larger than the cancers area versus the respiratory area. And so it allows the viewer to focus in on really the important point of the differences between the 5 causes of death. So as this slide says, when in doubt, dump it. Yeah, I read my slide, but I wanted to because you need to first start with your own review before you send out your slides for any type of peer review. We highly encourage you to use a peer to review your slides before you actually do a presentation. So finding somebody who can provide you feedback is always a great starting point. Slides can be essential, but they can also be distracting, and you may not know that. You may think it's perfectly fine, but until somebody else sees it, you may not know that. So if you're not sure, dump it. Basically, if you can't align the content, images, graphics, media, etc., on your slides to the goals and objectives for the presentation, dump it. Remember, nobody's going to miss what they didn't see. Okay? It's kind of unusual for us to think about this, but they're really not going to miss it if they didn't see it. Now, this is a great slide here because you could actually give this to somebody and say, hey, this is what I want you to look at. You may want to have somebody looking at your color scheme to be sure that everything is clear. You may want to have them looking at the size to be sure that is clear. Maybe you have a specific format or slide template that you're using. Are you using the right one for your organization? Do you have the right pieces of information in there? If you're doing a peer review, maybe you want to actually do a live presentation of that and get feedback on your presentation, especially if it's just a short piece. You may also want to have somebody looking over for required elements. If you're doing a presentation at a conference, the USU disclaimer should be on it. The USU logo should be on it, things like that. So these are all types of things that you could ask somebody to do a quick peer review for you on and to help you provide a better product. So a lot of times when we're doing a presentation, we forget to reference what we're doing, whether we're paraphrasing somebody or providing graphics or anything in here, you know, in terms of things we did not create. We highly encourage, and it really is part of the best practices here, that you treat your presentation like a published article. If you didn't create it, you should be referencing it. And, you know, that's where you could just make a very small font on the bottom of an image or something saying image from whoever created it, Adobe Stock, wherever you got it, or a Creative Commons place, or if it's a quote, a short reference for it, and then have a reference list at the end of your presentation so people know what was appropriately yours and what was not. And don't forget approvals. Remember, if you're doing any type of presentation outside of your USU community, you need to get approvals from your department leadership as well as external fairs, so be sure to provide that process. HGF and other contractors may have additional layers of things, so double check that and be sure you've had the right approvals for your presentation to go live. So preparing to present. It takes time. Usually it's not a just run and present. And I don't care how many times you've done something, a little practice is going to help you get in the mode. Presenters need to be in the right frame of mind to present well and have practiced more than just once. Some people actually use teleprompters to do this, and this especially flows into the idea of if you're using the ETI green room. Teleprompters are noticeable for those who aren't accustomed to using the tools. So a lot of times if you're preparing to present in the green room and you're going to use the teleprompter, you want to practice that a few times so that it looks natural. People don't see your eye movement. You know, everybody on the news is using a teleprompter, but you don't see their eyes move so much. That's what you're trying to get to. Zoom and Meet actually makes it even more noticeable when you're reading from your notes sections or your slides. So consider where you place your notes and record yourself a few times watching yourself do it. My notes are actually up on a very large screen right now, up in the right-hand corner, so that I can refer to them back and forth. You probably see my eye movement a little bit, but I'm trying to remain focused on the screen. And don't forget, do not underestimate the amount of time it takes for memorization. In order to prepare for a presentation like this, it can take dozens of run-throughs to get it right. So a little summary slide here. You know, I take a minute, take a look, and I'll talk while you're looking at this. I really think as we look at the best practices that are out there, the 6x6 guideline is probably one of the most important things that you could take away for this. Try and think about your media. What's good? What's bad? What's not? What do you need? What don't you need? Remember, you have unlimited slides out there. You don't have to cram everything in 4 or 5 or 6 slides. And if you only spend 10 or 15 seconds on a slide, that's okay. Again, your learners don't know. And if you're providing them a better presentation by spanning it out over multiple slides, that's fine. Thank you for watching today's Teaching with Technology Brown Bag session. You can view all Teaching with Technology Brown Bags on the USU YouTube channel under the full ETI playlist. Have a nice day.